Hey guys, welcome back to my channel and thank you so much for watching. In today's video, I'm going to be showing you how I made this Game of Thrones themed cake, so let's get right into it. This is going to be a longer video, so I will put the timestamps below if you just want to see how I made a certain part of this cake. I'm starting out with two 8-inch cakes, which I've leveled and cut in half, and I'm going to be filling that with some chocolate Swiss meringue buttercream. I'm grabbing my small offset spatula to make sure that my buttercream is level. Once my cake is stacked up, I'm going to be applying a thin layer all around my cake for the crumb coat and setting that into the fridge for about 25 minutes until it's set. Once you can put your finger on the buttercream and none of it comes off, it's ready for the final ice. I'm piling my buttercream on top and then keeping my spatula flat and even, I'm spinning my turntable around to smooth out the icing and then just applying some to the sides until my entire cake is coated. And I'm going to grab my bench scraper to go around the sides and smooth that out. And then all that buttercream that accumulated along top of my cake, I'm just going to push that into the center using my offset spatula again. Cake back in the fridge to chill, and then I'm going to move on to the fondant. My cake is going to be 3 tiers, and this is actually covering the middle 6-inch tier in fondant. I have some gray, and I'm rolling that out to about 1/8 of an inch thick on my cornstarch surface, and then I'm picking that up with my rolling pin and draping it over my cake, and using my hands and my fondant smoother to push all the air out from the top, and then working down the sides, just pulling out the skirt and smoothing down until I reach the bottom. My whole cake is covered and it's smooth. I'm going to go over it one more time with my fondant smoother, and then I'm going to cut off the excess at the bottom using my pizza cutter. You can see here I have the 8-inch cake for the bottom that I've covered in some white fondant in the exact same way, and I'm going to dowel my cake to give it some support. You need to add supports to a tall cake like this, otherwise it's just going to sink in on itself and you will be so terribly sad. I've got my wooden dowels and I'm placing those evenly in the bottom, and then using an edible food marker, I'm just marking off where it's flush with the cake, and then I'm going to cut those to size and put them back in. I'm adding a thin smear of buttercream to help my next tier stick better, and then using a cake lifter, I'm putting on my 6-inch tier, and I'm going to dowel that one exactly the same and add my little 4-inch top that I covered in more of that gray fondant. If you wanted the extra support, you could run a long dowel through the entire cake but since this one isn't leaving my house, I'm not going to worry about it since I won't be transporting it anywhere. So once my whole cake is stacked up and ready to go, I'm going to start with my decorations. First, I'm going to make my dragon egg / eye. So I have this dark red burgundy colored fondant that I created using some red and some black. And I have this egg template, which I will link below, and I'm cutting that out using my X-Acto knife. I want that to firm up before I move on so that it doesn't smush when I add the rest of my decorations. So I'm going to set that aside and start on the eye. So I have this little red ball of my fondant and I'm smushing that down, and then taking my rolling pin, I am flattening out the edges while keeping the middle part raised. Using my balling tool, I'm creating a little eye socket, so just like an oval little dent right in the middle of that raised part. I have some really light green fondant that I've rolled into a ball, and I'm just fitting that into my eye socket. I'm using some leaf green food coloring gel by Wilton mixed with some food grade alcohol, and then using my paintbrush, I am going to concentrate most of that color so it's darkest on the outside and lightest in the middle, and I'm just making it look muddled so it's not all going to be one solid color of green. I'm using some black food coloring and just making it look like a cat's pupil. I'm going to add my eye onto my egg since it's firmed up, and I'm just attaching that using some water. To give my eye a little more dimension, I'm adding some more red fondant around my eyelids, and then using my fondant tool, I'm just marking in some lines because I want it to look scaly. I don't want it to look smooth. So at this point, I got something that looks like this. And once my food coloring is completely dry, I'm taking some white food coloring gel by Wilton and just adding in a couple lines for the reflection in the eye. For the scales on my egg, I used my butterfly cutter and just chopped off the top of the wings there. You could just use a circle cutter if you want to, but this is just the route that I chose to take. And I'm layering those on, starting from the bottom and working my way up to make sure the tops of each of those scales is covered. Don't worry if it hangs off the side or hangs off the end of it. You're going to cut that off later. I'm also leaving a little bit of room on the bottom of the eye and the top of the eye because I want it to have kind of the effect that the egg is cracked and the dragon's looking through it. So I don't want scales completely surrounding the central part of the eye. Once the entire thing is covered, I'm just going around with my X-Acto knife and cutting off any of the excess that is overhanging. To create the scale effect around the part of the eye that's exposed, I've rolled up a little piece of paper super tight, and then I'm just pressing those circles in and just kind of squeezing them so there's a different shape each time until all of that is covered. Now that the fondant part of my egg is done, I'm using some red food coloring and I'm painting the eye as well as the scales. Using some black color dust, I'm shading underneath the scales as well as the very top and the very bottom of where the dragon's skin is exposed. This just makes it a little more three-dimensional. And then using some red color dust, I'm highlighting all the front parts of the scales, so the high points where they would just be lighter. And then as a final step for the egg, I have some gold luster dust that I've mixed with some food grade alcohol, and I'm brushing that on just parts of the scales, not the entire egg. To attach it to my cake, I have brushed the back with some water, and I've also put 3 toothpicks in right behind the eye so it's a bit thicker, and then I am just pushing that right into my cake and holding it there for a moment so it doesn't slip, and it should stay in place with the help of those toothpicks. For my dragon wings, I have more of my red fondant and I have my little template here, which I will link below as well, and I'm cutting that out with an X-Acto knife and allowing it to set. You need 2 of these and make sure there is one for either side so they're not both exactly the same. I've put some red fondant into a clay extruder, which is super handy, and after I roll out this long rope, I'm going to be brushing the very edges of the outside of my wing with some water and lining that with my rope of red fondant. I'm making sure to not cover the nail, I guess that thing is, the pointy thing on the corner, and then I'm using my butter knife to mark in some texture. Wherever there is a point on the bottom of the wing, I am adding a thinner piece of fondant going from the top to the bottom. I've just attached that using some water. And just like my egg, I'm going to be coloring in the entire thing using my red food coloring and then shading it using my black and red color dusts. Make it so that I can attach these to the cake, I have a skewer that I have covered with a strip of fondant, and I have added some water to my wing, and I'm just going to fit that on. If it overhangs at any point and you can see it when you flip the wing back over, you can just trim that off using an X-Acto knife. I recommend allowing this to dry overnight before you try to attach them to the cake. For my middle tier, I'm using some black food coloring that I've mixed with some food grade alcohol, and using a brush, I am going to be stippling that color all over the middle tier. If you want to protect the bottom tier from any splatter, you can wrap the entire thing in some saran wrap to protect it. So I'm just going over the entire thing, but I'm keeping it so that there's little peaks of gray showing through, so it looks a little mottled. It's not a solid black color. I've rolled out some white fondant, and I have this wolf head stencil. So I'm cutting that out. It doesn't have to look perfect. It just needs to look furry and in the shape of a wolf head. And then I have the Stark House sigil here, and I'm cutting that out from black fondant, and I'm adding that right over top. For the White Walker, I have this skeleton face mold that I'm adding some cornstarch to because I'm going to be pressing some fondant into this and I don't want it to stick. I tapped out the excess cornstarch and put in a big ball of white fondant that I'm pressing really hard into the mold so that all of it gets properly embossed. Please excuse my food coloring fingernails. I really gotta get some gloves when I dye my fondant. I will work on that. They're not dirty, I promise. My skull tipped out really easily, but it might just need a tug if you didn't add quite enough of the cornstarch. So I'm going to be going over the eye sockets and the nose with my balling tool, and I'm going to be adding ridges into the skull. This isn't based off of any specific White Walker. You can do whatever you want. I just noticed that a lot of them have the ridges, and then I'm going over the entire thing with my fondant tool and just marking in a bunch of lines. This is what I ended up with. Now I'm going to shade my skull. I'm adding more of my black color dust and just going over the entire thing, darkening areas like the sockets and the nose and between the teeth and on either side of the ridges. For the eyeballs, I have some light blue fondant, and I'm adding that into either side and just pressing it in lightly. And then very much like the dragon eye, I have some sky blue food coloring gel from Wilton, and I'm concentrating the color on the outside and just lighter in the inside. I actually ended up wanting the socket to be a bit deeper, so I gently popped out the eyeballs and then painted the sockets using some black food coloring gel so that it was really dark. I gently put the eyeballs back in and carried on my merry way. For the pupils, I'm using some more of my black food coloring gel, and they're not perfectly round because they didn't seem to be perfectly round in the pictures that I looked at, so they're a little bit wobbly looking. So this is him done. You could always add more detail or make like the Night King. You could add a nose and then the horns and some hair. I was happy with this level of detailing, but you do whatever you want. To get my friend on the cake, I brushed the back with water and then placed in some skewers and gently pressed him into the cake. He stayed really well, but you just want to make sure that you add enough of those skewers to support him because he is quite heavy. Exactly the same way as the wolf tier, I stippled on some blue food coloring that I really diluted with some food grade alcohol and covered the entire bottom. And then I added some white to my board to look like snow kind of. And then I have some crushed up rock candy in white that I just lined the bottom with for the ice effect. For the crown on top, I used Joffreys Crown as my inspiration. There was no template for this, so what I did is printed off a picture of his crown, and then I just traced out the very front design. So I used some golden yellow fondant that was really light. I rolled that out, and then using my X-Acto knife, I cut out this template 3 times, so I ended up with 3 pieces. It is an intricate design, but it's got twigs and stuff on it, so it didn't look perfect, but it doesn't really have to look perfect. I took each piece and I wrapped it around a can because I wanted it to dry in this rounded shape so that when I put them all together, they would form a circle. So I let those set up until they were really dry. Taking more of my golden yellow fondant, I rolled that out into a long snake and then I flattened it against my work surface. Unfortunately, my camera stopped filming while I was putting the crown on top of the cake, but you can see that I put them seam to seam and I used some water to hold them together so they came together as this nice crown, and then with my rolled out piece of fondant, I just wrapped that around the bottom. To finish it off, I used more of my Rolkem Super Gold Luster Dust and I mixed that with my food grade alcohol and I painted the entire crown until it was all golden. And this was the final result, guys. I know this was a long video. Thank you so much for watching and I will see you in the next one.